We're going to now get back in.
All right, that's good. No problem.
The three weekends, reading our students, you. So it's my pleasure to now introduce our next speaker, Father Federico Cinocca. So Father Federico is a Catholic priest and ethicist, originally from Milan, Italy. He serves as Vice President of Mission and Ministry at Emmanuel College in Boston, where he also teaches in the Department of Philosophy. After studying at the Theological Faculty in Milan, he earned his licentiate at the Gregorian University of Rome and his doctorate of sacred theology at the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, and also the product of the S.T.D. So about that. His dissertation, directed by Professor James Keenan, was for the intersection between ethics and liturgy, examining the power dynamics of liturgical celebrations. His teaching and research span ethics, political theology, and the intersections of Catholic social teaching and contemporary social issues. He currently leads an interdisciplinary project collecting the oral history of the Sisters of Notre Dame de North, and is a regular contributor to the first forum of the theological ethics in the world of the Church. In addition to his academic role, Father Cinocca directs mission-driven programs for students, including retreats and interfaith initiatives. And in his spare time, he's gracious enough to come here and be with us today. So please welcome Father Cinocca.
Thank you, Patrick, and all of you. It has been a great morning already, also interesting conversations. Let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude for being part of this conversation here at this remarkable university. Over the years, I have had the privilege of knowing several people who taught at Seton and more recently of meeting Patrick Manning at the conference a few months ago. That conference focused on art and vulnerability, but somewhere over a shared lunch, and I no longer remember exactly how we found ourselves discussing a range of questions about technological innovation and the ethical concerns raised by artificial intelligence in our society. So out of that informal conversation, this invitation emerged. So thank you, and let me begin. As the title suggests, this presentation is an invitation to reflect on how AI is profoundly reshaping not only the job market, but many fundamental dimensions of human life. How we understand what it means to be human, how we engage in social life and democratic participation, and how we contribute to society through our work. My goal this afternoon is to convey a sense of urgency around the need for renewed ethical reflection on human nature, democracy, and the meaning of work in the age of AI. My central claim is simple, but a demanding one. In the era of artificial intelligence, what we need is not less, but more liberal arts education. Education grounded in critical thinking, ethics, philosophy, and theology. And those of you here at Seton are already part of this broader endeavor, one that the Catholic Church as an educational institution has pursued for centuries. From the first universities in Paris, Rome, and Bologna, to contemporary institutions at the forefront of intellectual and cultural life around the world. So this presentation will be divided into three parts. In each, I will highlight some of the ways in which AI challenges our existing assumptions, and then propose a set of criteria and principles for ethical reflection. The aim is not to close the discussion, but to open it, to invite further dialogue and deeper reflection. So let's start with human nature. What you see here is an artwork produced by Atelier Haute Cuisine, and despite the name, they say that they are not cooking any food, but they mix different elements in art. And this atelier created an image. This image was inspired by an AI system. And the art is situated at the intersection of technology, art, and ethical reflection. The creative process began with a striking AI-generated image depicting humanoid figures with punched backs, seemingly transfixed by an object resembling a smartphone. One might say that this image suggests that this AI sees us as human beings. The installation has traveled through several cities and now is in Boston, where I actually saw it. The image immediately raises unsettling questions. What is AI trying to tell us about ourselves? Are we as a species suffering from the very technology that we have created? Are we simply too absorbed by our devices? Or are we witnessing early glimpse of the next stage of human evolution? In order to interpret and transform this initial concept, the artists deliberately just pose cutting-edge AI technology with traditional craftsmanship. Using classical molding techniques, they crafted fiberglass replicas of human bodies, rendering the work deeply personal, tactile, and unmistakably human. The finished figures move through urban landscapes as both reflection and provocation. They embody the tension between humanity and technology, inviting viewers to examine their own relationship with digital tools and to reconsider what it means to be human in an increasingly artificial world. More broadly, we are increasingly living in what the Japanese roboticist Hiroshi Ishiguro describes as a symbiotic society. For Ishiguro, there is a compelling rationale behind the development of humanoid robots. The human brain is naturally oriented toward recognizing and interacting with other human beings, which makes human-like forms especially effective interfaces for communication and assistance. Almost everywhere, many everyday household devices, from talking rice cookers to interactive appliances, already incorporate human-like modes of communication. On a global scale, the widespread use of voice assistants such as Google Home or Alexa demonstrates how easily people adapt to technologies that mimic human interaction. Beyond convenience, Ishiguro argues that understanding human intelligence itself requires the creation of robots that resemble us. This approach is grounded in a scientific method known as constructive science with intelligent systems. Research in human cognition has identified core components such as memory, computation, inference, and learning. And the challenge now is to replicate these functions in machines capable of modeling human intelligence and behavior, something that Hiroshi Ishiguro claims he's doing every day in the lab. And what you can see here is actually replica himself. The other person is not actually a person, next to him is a human, but it looks exactly like him. And sometimes we're sending him to teach classes, to do an interview on TV when he's busy, and he's able to actually hold a conversation for about 20 minutes, probably before the students are not looking at him, before they can actually realize that he's not the real Hiroshi Ishiguro. While earlier robotics research focused primarily on mechanics, sensors, image recognition, and voice processing, contemporary work increasingly operates at a cognitive and meta level. It now engages questions of embodiment, multimodal integration, intention, desire, consciousness, and social relationships, an endeavor made possible only through sustained interdisciplinary collaboration between fields such as robotics, neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. This development, however, is not unprecedented. Human beings have always understood themselves through the dominant technologies of their time. In the ancient world, shaped by disciplines such as music, geometry, and architecture, the human body was imagined as a well-tuned instrument or a proportional structure. In the Middle Ages, as theology occupied a central place in intellectual life, attention shifted to the soul and to the body's orientation towards communion with God. During the Industrial Revolution, as engineering advanced and machines such as clocks, pumps, and Stephen genes became widespread, thinkers like William Harvey described the heart as a pump and the body as an engine that converts fuel into work. With the discovery of electricity, the nervous system came to be understood as a network of electrical signals. In the mid-20th century, the rise of computers and cybernetics introduced the language of codes and information, profoundly shaping biology and genetics and the study of DNA. Today, in the age of algorithms and big data, how are we understanding our body? The brain is described as a network of human relationships as connections. So, as Marshall McLuhan famously observed, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. Given how unsettling the current technological landscape is, the ancient question with as problem what is a human being returns with great urgency. What values, if any, truly distinguish the human from its artificial reproduction? Now we can move to the second part of the presentation, the algorithm, threat, and hope for democracy, not simply how we understand ourselves, but also our life in society. AI and algorithms are not only reshaping our self-understanding of what it means to be human, but also the way we engage in public life and shape democracy. Already in 2011, Western journalists and observers named the uprising in the Middle East, what we also call the Arab Spring, as the Facebook or Twitter revolutions, due to the extensive use of social media, which included not only the aforementioned social networking sites, but blogs and content communities as well. The case of Myanmar shows how nation logic of dehumanizing speech can become radically dangerous when coupled with digital repetition. So what happened there? In 2010, the Buddhist nationalist rhetoric promoted by the Buddhist monk Ashwin Bharata portrayed Muslims as an existential threat to the nation and to Buddhism itself. This discourse did not spread primarily through traditional sermons, but through Facebook, which in Myanmar functioned as the internet itself. Facebook's engagement-driven algorithms repeatedly resurfaced Viratu's speeches, clips, and slogans, creating a feedback loop in which fear-based and violent rhetoric was normalized through constant exposure. What had once been extremist speech now became familiar, simply because people were listening to it and watching it every day on their devices. It became persuasive and socially validated, contributing directly to offline violence and revealing how platforms do not merely host speech, but actively shape its moral and political effects. But in the US, we can also talk about the case of QAnon. It shows a parallel dynamic in different political and cultural contexts. Emerging from anonymous online forums, QAnon framed politics as an apocalyptic struggle between evil elites and the righteous community of truth seekers. As these narratives migrated onto mainstream platforms, such as Facebook, engagement-driven algorithms repeatedly amplified emotionally charged posts, videos, and symbols rewarding outrage and fear. Through constant recirculation, conspiracy claims that were once fringe came to feel familiar and credible, blurring the line between what's true and what's fake. As in Myanmar, repetition transformed radical speech into shared common sense, contributing to real-world mobilization, democratic erosion, and political violence. As Harari argues in Nexus, AI is not simply another tool. It challenges the very structure of democracy and power itself. For centuries, democratic societies have relied on principles like self-correction, transparency, accountability, and the distribution of power. AI has the potential to undermine these foundations, not because it is malevolent, but because it concentrates knowledge and power in the hands of very few. But we have seen this before. When new technologies of control and surveillance emerged in the 20th century, different societies made very different choices. The Soviet Union, for example, used surveillance technologies to spy on its citizens, to enforce loyalty and obedience. Countries like Denmark or Canada, with similar technological capacities, chose not to do so. They invested instead in trust, in social welfare, and in institutions that protected personal freedom. The difference was not the technology itself, it was the same. It was the ethical and political framework surrounding it. So if democracy is to survive the AI revolution, we must rearm and reinterpret the principles that have guided through our times of upheaval. And we have 4 principles that are really key in order to protect our democracy. The first principle is benevolence. When a system collects data about me, my movements, my preferences, my emotions, that information should be used to help me, not to manipulate me. Access to personal information creates a moral relationship, a kind of fiduciary duty between those who hold the data and those who generate it. Yet in the digital world, we tolerate practices we would find outrageous anywhere else. We let companies follow us, record us, and sell the most intimate parts of our lives in exchange for free services, like a search that I'm doing on Google. Why do we accept this? Perhaps because the surveillance is invisible, hidden behind friendly interfaces and colorful icons. But what would we say if a government agency or a stranger on the street behaved the same way? A healthy digital society must find alternatives to this model. Maybe I can choose to share certain data in exchange for services. Or maybe, as with education and healthcare, some digital infrastructure should be considered public goods, universally accessible and protected from market exploitation. But what we have now, a model where protection and privacy are traded for profit, I think it is ethically unsustainable. The second principle is decentralization. True democracies depend on a certain degree of inefficiency. This may seem counterintuitive. I'm Italian, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and efficiency is kind of the #1 rule of our government. But a certain degree of inefficiency is actually a good thing for democracy. It would be far more efficient if all data were stored in one place, controlled by one authority, but efficiency and freedom rarely go together. Power must be dispersed. Information must be distributed. When knowledge is centralized, freedom disappears. Privacy and democracy both require that no single person or company knows everything about us. The third principle is mutuality. In healthy democracies, surveillance cannot be only top-down, governments watching citizens. It must also be bottom-up, citizens watching institutions. AI, if used wisely, can strengthen this mutual transparency. The same technologies that track consumer behavior could track corruption, expose environmental crimes, or reveal abuses of power. In that sense, AI could become an instrument of justice rather than oppression. Whether that happens depends entirely on how we design and regulate it. And finally, the fourth principle is change and rest. Democracy is based on the belief that people can grow, learn, and change. That our past does not define our entire future. Algorithms, however, tend to freeze us in categories: high risk, low trust, low credit score, unpredictable, uninsurable, and so on. When we let those rigid classifications rule our lives, we deny ourselves the right to renewal. A human technological system must be dynamic, capable of forgiving, of updating, of letting people begin again. In other words, we need algorithms that rest, that pause, that give human beings the space to transform. So what then does all this mean for us? It means that the challenge of AI is not a technical one, it is an ethical one. The question is not whether AI will replace us, but whether we will remain morally awake as AI increasingly becomes part of our world. AI does not cause revolutions or repressions, but it contributes to shaping the conditions under which human freedom, violence, and hope could appear. Now we move to the third part of the presentation: human work in a machine world. Every major technological revolution in human history has been followed by profound political and social transformation. Technology has never altered only how we work, it has consistently reshaped how we live, we think, and how we govern ourselves. The Industrial Revolution offers a clear illustration. It was not simply a change in modes of production, but a transformation of imagination itself. As machines replaced manual labor and steam and steel expanded the boundaries of what seemed possible, the rhythms of everyday life were permanently altered. Yet, the transformation was accompanied by deep anxiety and resistance. The Luddites, often caricatured as enemies of progress, were in fact skilled workers struggling to defend the dignity of their labor and the stability of their communities. Their fear was not irrational. They worried that new machines would rob human beings of purpose and reduce them to servants of their own creations. These concerns were echoed in the cultural imagination of the time. We have poets such as William Blake decry the rise of the dark satanic mills, seeing in the smoke-filled factories a symbol of the humanization and the erosion of the sacred. Such artistic protests were not merely expressions of nostalgia, they were early moral critiques, warnings about what it might mean to inhabit a world increasingly governed by machines rather than by human values. At the same time, industrialization undeniably brought significant benefits. Wealth increased, life expectancy rose, literacy expanded, and scientific knowledge advanced at an unprecedented pace. Yet the question remains, who truly benefited from this progress? While the industrial age delivered greater comfort and longevity for many, it also set in motion an environmental process that continues to escape our control. And this is getting worse and worse with the AI, because we rarely talk about the resources that are needed to run, whether we talk about electricity, water, rare materials, and all of that. Now, we were talking at my table, that Microsoft wants to build its own nuclear power plant in order to power the AI system, and we're doing all of this in the midst of an ecological crisis. We have yet to discover how to build an industrial society that is really sustainable. Species disappear daily, oceans filled with plastic, and the air itself bears the weight of industrial pollution. Progress, then, is never morally neutral. It contains both the promise of liberation and the risk of destruction. It expands the horizons of human possibility while simultaneously exposing our limited capacity to govern the power we create. The Industrial Revolution demanded a long and painful period of adjustment. In order to sustain industrial growth, European powers turned outward to colonies, conquest, and the extraction of resources. Now we're going to other planets in the universe. Imperial expansion was often justified as a civilizing mission, as though the spread of progress would benefit all. In reality, these projects carried devastating social and moral costs. Millions were exploited, displaced, or destroyed in the name of economic growth. Before humanity learned to restrain its new powers, countless lives were sacrificed to them. Nor this dynamic end with colonialism. The ideologies of the 20th century, Stalinism, Nazism, fascism, can be understood in part as attempts to engineer the perfect industrial society, promising efficiency, order, productivity, and renewal. They instead unleashed unprecedented violence. The First World War had already revealed the consequences of fusing industrial politics and warfare into a single system. The factory became the battlefield, and the logic of production, maximizing output, minimizing waste, was applied to human life itself. Every technological revolution, therefore, brings with it the possibility of a moral revolution or of a moral failure. The central question is never simply what we are capable of doing, but what we ought to do with the power we possess. Technological revolutions also affect economy, finance, and the job market, and can cause major political shifts. More and more studies today are linking the rise of totalitarianism in the 1930s in Germany to the big rise in the unemployment rate. This is why holistic education, grounded in ethical reflection and critical thinking, is more essential than ever. Many jobs can really be replaced by AI. And this is not necessarily a cause for alarm. You can see some of these tasks here, some of the tasks that AI can really accomplish quite well or even outperform humans. But the deeper question is how human beings can continue to flourish in a world where machines increasingly perform tasks once reserved for human labor. The Industrial Revolution tested humanity's ability to build a just society in the presence of enormous power. The AI revolution will test our ability to build a wise one. Technology itself is not merely a model. It is a structure of power. It does what we design it to do. The moral responsibility lies in how we choose to employ it, whether to dominate or to serve, to manipulate or to understand, to enslave or to liberate. If we can remain committed to principles such as benevolence, decentralization, neutrality, and possibility of change, AI may yet help democracy renew itself, not by reproducing the past, but by recovering the foundations of freedom itself. That ultimately is the ethical challenge of our time, not how to make machines think like humans, but how to ensure that humans continue to think ethically about the machines they create. So, what do? Some actions. Moving from diagnosis to action requires recognizing that algorithms are no longer neutral technical tools, but, as I said, structures of power. One concrete step is to introduce regular algorithmic audits, model of financial audits. If we routinely investigate how markets operate, why should we not systematically examine how recommendation systems and decision-making algorithms are designed, trained, and deployed? We do that systematically in finance. Why couldn't we do that in algorithms as well? Transparency must also include what Yuval Noah Harari has called a right to an explanation. Algorithms today are increasingly used to profile us, sell to us, rank us, predict us, and even judge us, whether it is a health insurance company, it is a court system or a bank, a hiring process or a university admission board. If automated systems shape our life changes, then citizens are owed clear explanations of how those systems operate and what assumptions they and what assumptions they have. And then another point is banning the bots. Again, we were talking at the table that almost half of the traffic on ads is actually generated by bots. And all of these information traffic can swing people's opinion one side or the other. And Daniel Dennett is arguing for the necessity to ban the bot outright, which they may simulate human agency, while actually they are eroding trust, accountability, and democratic deliberation. A concrete ethical framework already exists, and actually we heard about it in a previous presentation, the road call to AI ethics. This is something that was elaborated a few years ago. The Vatican working with some major tech companies, and they elaborated the 6 principles that were discussed earlier, so I will not repeat that. But you can see actually the original chart here. And today, of course, Pope Leo XIV is championing again the commitment of the Church to build a responsible future. And when he chose his name, he said that Pope Leo XIV lived during a time of profound transformation. Today, we are seeing many of these dynamics again, and that's how he chose basically the same name. And in many of his earlier interventions as well, he spoke about the importance of reflecting on AI and the role that AI plays in our society. So in conclusion, in a moment when technologies shape perception, judgment, and collective action at unprecedented scale, critical and ethical thinking is needed more than ever. Without sustained reflection, public accountability, and moral imagination, we risk allowing systems designed for efficiency and engagement to quietly redefine what it means to be human, to be responsible, to be free. And the risk is that we are not simply not reflecting anymore on what it means to be human, but we lose the key characteristics and components of what has defined human nature for centuries. Thank you. This is my email address, so if you would like to engage further or send me some comments, I'd be happy to address them as well.
Thank you very much. All right, so you're happy to engage him later, but we can engage him right now, at least for the next 10 minutes. So, questions, reactions, responses?